This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to journalist Sean Williams. He's one of my favourite reporters. He's been out in Ethiopia on the ground reporting on the war there. Now the war has advanced to a different stage. There is war seemingly on all fronts. The Tigray are surrounding the capital of Ethiopia. The Oromo fighters are getting involved, and even Eritrea is getting involved. It's looking like a very dangerous situation. Sean's going to explain to us what's happening, how this has advanced, and where it's looking like it's headed. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please do consider supporting us. You get a lot more extra content at patreon.com/popularfront. So since we last spoke about the situation in Ethiopia, a hell of a lot has changed. The rebels are no longer on the back foot. There's other rebel groups are getting involved. Countries pulling their diplomats out of the country. Maybe just explain to us what's happened. How has this happened so quickly? How is it that the militia forces are now really gaining traction?
Well, I mean, first off, it's probably good to note that this was pretty foreseeable from how things were going a few months ago. So it was kind of billed as a fight between these TDF rebels and the government, but it was always going to be more messy than that. All of the regions around Tigray, I mean, they've been fighting for decades with each other, and there's been loads of bad blood between them. I mean, never mind the Eritreans for a moment. You've got Afar to the east of Tigray, you've got Amhara to the south and the west of Tigray. And it's kind of just become a sort of low burbling civil war at this point between various different factions. Now, as it stands at the moment, the TDF, with all of the material and the weapons and the men and everything that they've got behind them from back in the day, they've found themselves sort of advancing all the way sort of within or around 100 miles away from the capital, Addis Ababa, which is pretty scary if you think that they're going to launch an attack on a 5 million strong city. I don't think that's going to happen. I think for two reasons. I mean, one is that it'd be a complete bloodbath, and the second is that it doesn't really suit their PR campaign that this is just a defensive war against the government. So as it stands, you've kind of got this standoff now where pockets of land in all of these different states that are pretty rural, unguarded, and kind of left behind by the governing or the ruling governors in each state. They're getting sort of switched hands very quickly. There's a lot of atrocities being carried out. One good example, or one horrible example, is still Western Tigray. Back in the 90s, it was handed over to the Tigrayans by the Tigrayan-led TPLF, who downed the communists. It was taken from Amhara. Now, that's the only part of Tigray that's got any agriculture or land that you can really do anything with. So now that the guards let down and there's pretty sparse population out there, the Amhara have gone back in with their own militia, taken it, and that's in the early times of this conflict. That's where you saw a lot of the really, really awful human rights abuses carried out. And that area, which I guess it's probably the size of a couple of British counties, it's just kind of like switched hands over and over and over again. And even like Amnesty today, or I think yesterday, brought out a report, there was yet more massacres being carried out there. So it's kind of a war of the periphery, really. There's like all of these different sort of border regions between the different places, the different states. They're the bits that are really seeing the worst of it right now, because they're just kind of hinterlands, just with a few battalions of troops or militias here and there. So where it's at now, you've got the Tigrayans, you've got the government. The Eritreans seem to play a sort of more subdued role now. Maybe they've got their arse handed to them by the international community a little bit. But the Afar region and the Amhara region are kind of doing a pincer move on Tigray. I don't know if this meets high level sort of analyst material, but it's a complete shit show. It's horrible. Like it's really getting messy. Hard to kind of fathom from day to day.
Yeah, how has it got to this level though? Because it seemed like the fighting was mostly consolidated around like the Tigray areas. Now, like you said, it's very close to the capital of Ethiopia. How has that happened? Like, what has there been like a major breakdown in the Ethiopian military or what?
Well, it was always destined to happen in some way because the Tigrayans are the former dominant force in Ethiopia, and they've basically got loads of weapons. A lot of the military stations were up there. Due to this sort of crony, isolationist, rural police state that they governed for nearly 30 years, they've got all of the commanders, all of the top military brass are from Tigray, or not all of them, but most of them, and tons of men, and they've got this like sort of almost national culture of fighting a resistance after so many years leading the fight against the Derg, that's the Soviet-backed communist junta. So they've got all of the stuff behind them. I mean, the government itself was always kind of playing shit or bust by going to war with these guys because they don't really have the personnel. They've got the weaponry and they've got international friends, but when you're fighting a guerrilla force on its home turf, tooled to the eyeballs, with a much depleted military that you've just kind of gouged by taking the Tigrayans out of it, you're kind of on a hiding to nothing, and that's kind of what happened, I guess, in the time that we were talking last. That was just in the process of happening. Now the rebels, I don't know if you can call them rebels. I mean, they're a proper full-blown army, but they're down as far as this town. They've taken Lalibela, which is the ancient sort of a religious city between Addis and Tigray. So as it stands, it's kind of like a stalemate, and it's sort of difficult to see where it's going to go next, because either move from either side is going to nullify their claims of fighting on the back foot. They can only take more land for themselves, so they can only lose the PR battle by winning the war, so to speak.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of kind of maps online, and then a friend of mine that lives in Ethiopia has just said like they're bullshit. Like, a lot of these kind of very online Twitter analysts are sharing them. Not that they're like there's anything wrong with them, but they're actually not really representing what's going on in the ground. How fluid is this situation? Like, are there like static front lines yet, or is it just like taking town by town, push back, whatever? Like, what kind of conflict is it right now?
Yeah, as far as I see it, it's really, really fluid. And again, like, I haven't been there for a while. I've been keeping close tabs, and I want to go out there again soon. But it's, I mean, if you look at the sort of daily news coming out of the main Ethiopian news sources, there'll be towns and villages taken day by day, just switching hands back and forth. You'll hear of atrocities being carried out hundreds of miles apart, like in completely opposite scales of the country. So it's really, really kind of a fluid, fast-moving conflict at the moment, while at the same time not being sort of an all-out war. It's quite a chilly conflict at the moment. Like it's breaking out in fits and starts, but there's no kind of consolidated front line, no sort of major battles being fought, and that's why a lot of this is to do with the sort of public perception, because a lot of times, we're talking about armies that, despite having a lot of weapons, they're not tooled up as sort of like European or sort of global North countries would be. So a lot of the success of these guys on the battlefield actually depends on whether the people want to take them in or not, and that's why a lot of this is being fought out online in the media. It's really complicated. So it's hard for your sort of regular rolling news guys to cover it.
Yeah, I remember when we spoke before, there was a very serious situation with Ethiopian troops just carrying out horrific war crimes, rape, that sort of thing. But there's also been the same thing happening now with the Tigray militias, right? I read that they had basically executed something like 10 or 15 civilians in some village. Maybe you can give us an idea of what's going on with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's become clear, and it kind of was clear, but it wasn't being widely reported before, that the TDF, that's the Tigray Defense Force, that's the kind of military wing of the old TPLF, the former ruling party of Tigray. Well, current, depending on who you're speaking to. It was becoming apparent, even from my reporting, that's back in May, that these guys were carrying out sort of retributional attacks on civilians that had taken in rival forces. Committing rape as a weapon of war, and doing all your kind of common or garden horrific civil war stuff that was being reported sort of on behalf of the army or the Ethiopian forces side before, and that was really a result of who was reporting and where they were getting their information from, which I find quite interesting. Kind of switched from the Addis government line in the early days. Sort of when people realised it was all kicking off, you got people flooding over to the Tigrayan side and taking their word for rote. And now there's a bit more of a sort of unbiased, balanced view of the war. But the TDF are clearly not just a back foot defensive sort of guerrilla force. They are fully fledged military, and they are surging into oppositional state territory, and they're committing these atrocities almost by the day. And what they've been doing is saying, we welcome everyone that wants to investigate these, from NGOs, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, but they know full well that no one could get in there, and they won't let anyone get in there. So they're playing that canny old game that the government did a few months ago. So yeah, I don't know. It kind of makes you think about that Adam Curtis stuff and oh dearism, where the media is so desperate to pick a side, I think, in the early days of this, and it's clear that the vast majority of abuses have been carried out by the military or the Ethiopian military, but that doesn't make these TDF guys shrinking violets. And yeah, I'm sure I'm going to get pelters from both sides after this, but I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of fucked up a bit. Well, not fucked up, but we had did this woman on. She was great. Like, she was good, for information, but was very clearly just on the Tigray side. You know what I mean? And then it's like, oh, okay, right. And then I started reading into it, and it's like, oh, hang on, wait, there, like you said, there's no kind of, oh, the resistance against this level of whatever. It's just right now, it's evolved, it's just become just horrible. You know what I mean? Just absolutely fucking brutal on every side of it, from what I've read anyway. I mean, like I said, I've not been there, but you have. And people I speak to there are just, I know even Tigray people that are don't like the militias, the Tigray militias.
Yeah, I met several of those people, and then when I came back and reported that, there was sort of widespread disbelief. Everyone's behind our boys, kind of thing, but they're not. And that's just, I mean, yeah. To put it in context, at the early parts of the war, the government got away with a lot of bullshit that it was saying, including who started the war. I mean, the New York Times came out with a really good piece the other day about how Abiy, the PM, was sort of planning for this for a long time after he got the Nobel Peace Prize. Christ, which is just laughable. But he said that the Northern Command, the guys stationed up north in Tigray rather, they were attacked by the TDF, and that's what kicked off the war. That's massively dubious, but because he was broadly Western aligned, I think everyone gave him a free pass. As the war went on, and a few sort of investigative reporters sneaked their way into the area and were like, oh shit, there's mass graves everywhere and the towns are bombed to crap. Now, I think you got a big turning point in the international media where they were like, okay, now we have a victim and we have a perpetrator, and now we're going to go on that line. And then people started talking to the TPLF leadership a lot, and these guys are sort of old school, sort of authoritarian. They know how to spin a good game, but they are talking crap a lot, and so that meant that the last few months, the sort of crimes of the TDF haven't been getting reported. And now finally people are figuring out that, both sides are carrying out atrocities. So now you get a slightly more even-handed approach to that. I mean, I'm not even sure if that's having much effect either, but you do get some sort of bad actors coming in now from various new media organizations that I probably shouldn't mention, but...
No, I've seen it a lot, man. And there's a real problem with this thing of the Tigray rebels or whatever are, I mean, on paper at least, kind of old school Marxist rebels, right? So yeah, on paper. So then I've seen these kind of internet radicals are these are the good guys. You know what I mean? It's fucking hell, man. War is not your political playground. It's annoying. Yeah, I know you've been getting a lot of that bullshit. I've seen as well now that other forces, the Oromo, they're involved in the conflict, right? How significant is their role in this?
Well, potentially massive. That's the sort of elephant in the room, I guess, because the Oromo is the biggest ethnic group in Ethiopia. There's been several uprisings there in the very recent past, and they're pretty tooled up as well. They're very historically, they're sort of good at stirring up unrest against the government, and it kind of envelops the Oromo land, envelops Addis Ababa, backs onto Amhara as well. So it's very strategically placed. So yeah, so now we get to the point where it's a bit sort of armchair commentary, but if you had the Oromo making an alliance with the Tigrayans, for example, that would be an incredibly powerful force. I would bet that would almost certainly defeat the government in a fight. Then you have the possibility that this war just descends into a kind of communal, inter-regional battle, and that would be catastrophic. I mean, that was kind of the thing that I'd predicted months and months ago would happen, because despite what Addis is doing, which is to weaponize the idea of colonialism and Ethiopia being unconquered by white European forces, and saying that the current media war with the West is a neo-colonialism, it's actually that's a bad faith thing to do, first off, and secondly, it's not. Ethiopia is barely a country. I mean, as the idea of a nation state as we understand it it's sort of held together with sticky back plastic, and it's essentially an empire of very, very different regions with different cultures, languages, customs, religions in most parts. And I mean, having done the research that I've done in the last couple of years or so, I actually can't believe that it's still standing as a country. I think it's incredible that it's still around. So I would not be surprised if, to avoid some kind of a catastrophic all-out war, there was some kind of a power-sharing deal or devolution or something like this on the table that might split Ethiopia up. I think I don't think that's that unlikely at all.
I've seen people describe it, or at least compare it in some ways, to like Yugoslavia. Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, I think that is accurate. I mean, I guess, and I'm no expert on the Balkans, but with a passing interest, you've got the communal side, you've got historical sort of land swaps and land grabs going on throughout sort of forever. You've got a lot of very, very right-wing sort of fascist rhetoric at the heart of this and the heart of that as well. I mean, this is also the worrying thing, right? I mean, it's already turning into a simmering sort of battle for control of various borderlands as it is. If it devolved even further, if say that the TDF did make a real threat to flood south and get into Addis, I don't think Abiy would have any option but to either step down or fight them full on. That would cause a complete sort of breakdown in the sort of administration of the country, and you could easily get warring factions in the style of the Balkans. Yeah, I wouldn't rule. I mean, it sounds a bit doomsday, but I definitely wouldn't rule that out at the moment at all. No.
Well, I mean, it's essentially a war on all fronts, though, right? So I think the comparison makes sense. Maybe not like culturally or whatever, but I think just in terms of like there's several different states here that have been kind of arbitrarily put into, one country, if you like, but now it's falling apart. It just seems to me like every group is going like, right, let's go now. You know what I mean? Which definitely is not a good sign. I mean, the Oromo, for all their kind of, I know that the militias there are pretty wild, but they have been like brutally oppressed by the Ethiopian government, right? I mean, I remember reading about it years ago. So yeah, right. So it's kind of like, I mean, not to condone anything, but it does seem to me like people are going, right, now we're going to have a go. You know what I mean? Like on various different fronts.
Yeah, I mean, and there's precedent to this, right? I mean, the reason that Eritrea exists is because it fought a decades-long war of independence with Addis when it was under Haile Selassie and then under the Derg, and that became an independent state. And I mean, it's an absolutely appalling one, but the other regions will be looking at that and thinking, well, why can't we do it? The problem is, especially for, say, Afar, which is very arid, not a lot of mineral wealth there, and Tigray, is that it's very hard to see them. I think I mentioned this in the last podcast that we did as well. It's very hard for them to sort of survive as a state within their current boundaries. I mean, even less so if the kind of fertile west of the state is ripped away by the Amhara. So that then becomes almost by definition they have to sort of change the borders in some way or do something, because they can't survive being a sort of mountain deserty state with very little going on. That won't survive. So yeah, then you start to pose all questions like that. I wish I had like better news, but it's, you know, everything that I thought would happen now has happened, and I don't really see anyone rhetorically doing anything but backing themselves further into a corner. Abiy, obviously, you know, this great Nobel Peace Prize winner, he was out on the front line with the boys in his fatigues, pretending to fight. So that's really a man of peace. And he's telling his people to sort of pick up arms and join a fight. So he's essentially sort of mobilizing the civilian population to try and wipe out an ethnic group, which, I mean, that does sound a little Balkan.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. It's so interesting that this guy won the Nobel Peace Prize. Like, it just makes me like, I remember being about like 22, being like clueless of things, and I was reading this book and it was talking about Menachem Begin in Israel. And then I read that he got the Nobel Peace Prize, you know, even though they knew everything he'd been doing, you know, and then I realized like, oh, this whole thing is bullshit. You know what I mean? And then it's like Obama got one, and it's like, what is this even? You know what I mean? Does he mention that shit still? Does he still be like, I got the Nobel Peace Prize?
Oh yeah. See, I don't even get what the Nobel Peace Prize is. It's just a bunch of like weird fellas in Norway. Like, why are we giving this credence in the first place? Like, why does everyone give a toss? But yeah, I mean, he was pretty much leveraging it directly to join forces with the Eritreans and wipe out the Tigrayans in the first place. So, I mean, at the very least, it should be a lifetime achievement award. It shouldn't be awarded on the spot. I mean, who gives a toss about the Nobel Peace Prize? It shouldn't exist anymore.
So, in terms of the Ethiopian military, what's their situation now? Are they kind of pushing forward, or what? Are they all like completely defensive around the city now? Because I imagine that's really, you know, it seems to me now it's gone past them being like, right, retake this bit. Like, more, you would think there would be more like focused on, right, we must protect the capital if it's that under threat.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of telling, because I don't think that is what they're doing at the moment per se. I think they are kind of pushing into various different fronts and retaking and losing and retaking again different towns well outside of the capital. So, you know, there was some talk that the reason the Tigrayans took some of the towns around the area that they did was that they could kind of squeeze off the supplies and sort of lay siege to the government. Not necessarily like starve Addis, but starve the government of mineral wealth, various things that they need to survive in terms of taxes and revenue. And that would sort of drive them to the negotiating table. And I don't think that the government in Addis really takes an attack on the city that seriously at the moment, because they are sort of pushing here and there. But as far as I understand it, and I'm not like, you know, not like nailing my colours to any team here. I see them as being hugely depleted, and trying to sort of stall for time. And I mean, that's one reason you would assume why Abiy is out in the middle of the battle trying to sort of rally civilians to get involved and join up, because as he must see it, there is no way to conventionally win this war. So I think that if you were sort of holding a gun to my head and saying what is going to happen in the next year, I would say that he will broker some kind of a ceasefire that will bring the TPLF, the guys that he initially tried to cut out of everything, back to the table. And there'll be some kind of a reduced autonomy leveled at the TPLF that they can kind of they can kind of show their people that they're winning back control in some way from the government, but not enough control that the other regions go, well, hold on, what about me? So Abiy's got a bit of a tough balancing act to play in the next year, because he's got to try and stop the war without losing the country. And I think that's actually quite difficult to do now. I think he might be beyond the Rubicon for that.
Yeah, what's the what are the public? What's their kind of reaction to all of this? I imagine they're very scared about the conflict, but in terms of the state, are they rallying behind him, or are they kind of like, nah, fuck this guy?
Some people are, yeah. I mean, he still has a fair deal of popularity. I think I was speaking to someone quite recently in Addis, who really knows their onions, and they were saying that if there were an election held tomorrow, he would still win. He's got pretty decent approval rate. I think the majority, because the Tigrayans are, I think, 7 million of 110 million people, so they're a very small minority, and there is a very strong truth, a very large amount of truth rather, to the idea that they were a cronyist, self-serving autocracy when they're in control, and that's why you get a lot of these companies like Metek, which is a huge conglomerate owned by various pals and generals within the hierarchy back then, still making billions, just sort of kind of shaky hands, backdoor deals, taking money away from the country, and giving power back to pals in the Tigray. So there is a very strong opposition to those old TPLF leaders. There is not a very strong appetite for war or for a genocide against those people. That is something that's being manufactured largely by the government. So, I mean, the conversations that I was having in parts of the country that weren't Tigray were, yes, we despise those old guys. They really ran a lot of the country into the dirt. There is a kind of vaguely racist idea that is akin to anti-Semitism, really, where they were stealing money, and they were somehow kind of superior and inferior racially at the same time. It's very odd. Reminds me of, like Nazi Germany or Armenia and Turkey as well. It's that kind of strange thing where you've managed to vaunt this conspiracy that makes them secret puppet masters, but also sort of less than human. It doesn't really. It's kind of like a two-pronged bigotry. It's really dangerous, and I mean that's driven a lot of the stuff that's been going on in the early days of the war and still going on now, although on a slightly smaller scale. I don't think that the public are going to start standing for it if Tigrayans are getting dragged out of their beds and shot and purged in the middle of the night in Addis. People have been asked for their ID cards, and that's bad enough, but I don't see it. I don't think... It's taken on a very racial rhetoric, I mean, the country has forever, though. The stuff with the Roma in the 2017 or 18 when it last was, I mean, that was all purely racial. So it's not got a good foundation, all of this stuff.
No, not at all. And I hate to mention, bring up the West in this, but I'm only doing it because we know, obviously, the West absolutely fucking loves meddling in Africa historically and even now. So, So what's the West's reaction to this? I've read a little bit, but generally I zone out and the West is like, this must stop. It's like, whatever. But, what have they done? I read that they removed some of their diplomats and stuff like that. Other than that, have they got any other skin in the game with this?
No. They have chucked out. They've withdrawn a few diplomats. I mean, who gives a toss? And there's been some strongly worded letters sent around. But this isn't this is a conflict that I think a lot of people in the West are fearing, not on humanitarian grounds, but on sort of geopolitical grounds. So Ethiopia is, on paper, a democracy buried in a kind of region that is almost sort of entirely full of dictators. Everywhere on the borders, there's Sudan, South Sudan, Eritrea, Somalia. Over the water, there's Yemen. I mean, these are this is an area that you get sort of policy wonks in DC and London talking about as, the Horn of Africa being sort of failed and Ethiopia being a bastion of some kind of a state non-failure. So they talk about it in those kind of terms, and they're worried about certain countries funneling money into it. So that you've got Turks putting money into various infrastructure projects, but also supplying drones and military equipment to the Eritreans and various factions. China's there, the UAE's there as well. So I think a lot of the issue that the West take with this is that it could exacerbate, not necessarily that it stays within Ethiopia. I mean, it was only really Freddie Mercury that gave a toss last time it kicked off in the 1980s. So I don't hold out a lot of hope for the West doing anything particularly strong this time around. I mean, I'm not even sure what they could do, to be honest. But they're not really prioritizing it, and it could be a huge war that lasts for years.
Yeah, that's the worry. You're looking to head out again, right? You've already been there reporting on the ground. What is it you think you'll focus on when you go back out there, if you know yet?
I would really like to get to those peripheral areas, because it would be interesting to see how the battles are physically being played out there. It's clear that, the Eritrean side of this, how they're sort of encroaching into Ethiopian land, and how they're not going to go away, and no one's going to tell them to go away either, and they're not going to play ball. That's already been reported. I saw it when I was out there. So I think we can safely say that that's happening. But in terms of how this war is sort of devolving into a communal thing, that is what I would like to look into. I'd like to go out to Amhara, Western Tigray. I'd like to go to Lalibela and speak to people there. I mean, very few of these reports are speaking to civilians that are being affected by this. And I mean, it might seem like it's not the worst thing in the grand scheme of things when there's all these massacres going on, but I think that having these fluid lines and having this uncertainty hanging over you in your own country, I think that causes a huge amount of sort of national stress, and people, inheriting all kinds of trauma from just not knowing where they live. And I think it's going to have a huge destabilizing effect on the country in the long term. And that's why I think it will devolve in some way. But I would like to go to those sort of liminal areas and see what's happening there. Yeah.
All right, mate. Well, that sounds really good. I hope you get back out there. Is there anything else you want to... Yeah. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we go?
Well, I don't know. Could talk about the corruption in the UK, but that's too depressing as well. So I guess... I guess we'll leave it at a civil war in Ethiopia. But I would like people to be very wary of information that carries hashtags and all kinds of shit like that online, because the social media sphere in Ethiopia is absolutely toxic, and it's sort of being hijacked by, like I said before, a few very nasty bad actors posing as journalists who are going in there to sort of cry imperialism or communism one way or the other. That's not what this conflict is at all. And just be very careful when you're picking and choosing your information online. Yeah,
man, I agree. I think you've been doing great work out there. You've made it a lot more clearer for me, definitely, and a lot of other people. Where can people follow your work if they want to do that?
Yeah, well, I'm on Twitter as always, S. Williams Journo, and I do a podcast with Danny Gold, the Underworld podcast, where we talk about organized crime that slips into kind of this sort of stuff as well, war and conflict. So people can find the podcast, they can find me there online. Yeah, anywhere you're online, I'm probably tapping away, complaining about something.
All right, mate. Thank you very much, Sean. Really appreciate that.
Cheers, mate. Pleasure.
That was journalist Sean Williams speaking about the battle in Ethiopia between the Tigray, the Oromo, Eritrea against the state in Ethiopia. Very messy situation. Be sure to check out Sean's podcast with Danny Gold, Underworld podcast. If you like Popular Front, you're probably going to like the Underworld podcast. It's very interesting. They focus on organized crime all over the world, but very specific stories involved in that. It's cool. Check it out, Underworld podcast. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front and you want a lot more content from Popular Front, and you also want to support us, keep us going, because we do not take corporate money and we don't have any shithead advertising, only advertising from ethical people, you can do that by supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront, or you can go to popularfront.co/support. There's many different ways you can support us there. Crypto, yeah, boohoo. You're apparently not allowed to like crypto anymore. We do. popularfront.co/support. Check that out, or patreon.com/popularfront. Thank you to our sponsors. They are Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee shop business selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue, 97239. Thank you to Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA. One in South, one in West. Find them on socials at Grindcore House. And thank you also to our other sponsor, Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and writing about historical conflict propaganda from around the world. You can buy prints at propagandopolis.com. Use the promo code POPULARFRONT10 for 10% off. If you want to follow us on social media and spread the word, you can do that. Go to instagram.com/popular.front. We get threats of getting banned all the time because Zook is a fucking clown. So you might have to follow the backup as well at popularfront_. That's the same as our Twitter. So our Twitter is twitter.com/popularfront_, youtube.com/popularfront, and again the website popularfront.co. If you want to look at my work, that's jakehanrahan.com, HANRAHAN. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home and the outro was by Sam Black. Check his music out at samblackpf.com, or follow him on Instagram, samblack.jpeg. Thank you to the high tier Patreons. You're keeping this moving. They are Tom Taylor, Ethan Zwick, R.A., Champagne Anarchist, Thwat, Elise, Jess, Louis, David McManus, Joaquin Williamson Holt, Idoye Travis, Tom Petrie, James Leons, Kate, Lisa Milgram, Bradley Davies, Brendan Crave, Pete Hesher, RX, A. Nicole, Travis Lieberman, Cherry, Ben Marshall, Dallas Dunn, LD50 Seattle, MJ, K. Glitter Vulcan, Meredith Waters, Bethany Swoveland, Adam H., Karante, Bjorn Kirsten, Diamond Steam, Michael O'Connor, Zach Packard, Todd Cravens, Nicholas Butter, JD, Jav, Ian Froese, James Cully, Tynan Daly, Ethan, Shanklin the Painter, Fitz Madrid, Ed Coulthard, Mike Barone, Ben, Liam Williams, Chris Cusimano, Degenerate Zero Alpha, Giorgio Arani, DR, Trey Nance, Amy R, Rubicon, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Nawaiz, Nate Van Dor, Christina Rivetti, Freya Northman, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Young Wasabi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, JL, Stephen Davila, Anthony Kabarak, Dan Donham, Fletcher, Diana Gorvanek, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did. Peter McCormick's mad, he just bought Bedford football team. Check that out, Real Bedford. It's an interesting project. Axel Iverson, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, and Moritz Zumbwall. Thank you all very much. Really do appreciate you. If you weren't on the Patreon, then we would be fucked. So yeah, thank you very much. Again, if people want to support, patreon.com/popularfront. Merry Christmas.